cybersecurity maturity model is a cybersecurity framework that builds off previous DoD-centered frameworks that some of you are probably familiar with, like FAR 52204, DFARS 252-204, and NIST 800-171. CMMC evolved from an initiative intended to standardize cybersecurity practices and processes to better protect information flowing down from the Department of Defense to third-party organizations that work on a contractual basis. These companies, they can do anything from manufacturing goods like forks and spoons for military mess halls to creating new weaponry for our military forces. And those subject to the new standards include everyone from primes like Raytheon and Lockheed Martin to your more mom and pop style manufacturing hubs like small local tool and die companies. And those companies might only participate by making, a spring or a pin for a prime contract or the overall product that a prime's trying to produce. And primes, for those who aren't familiar with that terminology, they're generally larger organizations. I mentioned Raytheon and Lockheed Martin. There's a ton of them out there. But what they do is they distribute work to smaller subcontracting organizations. And it's through these smaller organizations that the DoD began to recognize shortcomings in the cybersecurity posture of the Defense Industrial Base, or the DIB. So what's the purpose of CMMC? Generally speaking, the framework's designed to secure the Defense Industrial Base supply chain. That's kind of a blanket statement. Obviously, this framework was designed to secure the Defense Industrial Base, but why the change to what they had been doing, the way they'd been doing things? And I guess for lack of better words, the way that things were being done showed a broken system with very little accountability. The lack of accountability led to major gaps in contractors' cyber defense programs and just massive holes that attackers easily exploited to gain critical intel. So what was really happening that pushed the initiative is these subcontractors in the supply chain were creating a huge vector of attack through lack of security awareness, things like antiquated processes and practices, and in some cases, and probably in a lot of cases, the assumption they had little chance of becoming a targeted cyber entity to cyber criminals or nation state actors. And I'm sure some of you listening have had these arguments with clients outside the DIB before, and people in the DIB or entities in the DIB are no different. What the attackers, especially nation state actors, were doing was taking the little bits and pieces of aggregate data from these smaller subcontractors to get the big picture of what the subcontractors were working on to create for the primes DoD contracts. So, getting like a piece of data that's for a spring that's in a new weapon, or things like that, and they were putting it together to build these products. And when I talk about this, there's usually a light bulb that goes off with people that hear it, because how many times have you seen news articles about drones or weapon systems that look so similar in appearance and functionality to U.S. assets? Drones are a huge point of talk, because you've seen drones that look just like U.S. assets, and these could be ways that they get those plans. And according to estimates from the DoD, we found that $60 billion worth of data is lost every year to these adversaries, and it's mostly nation state actors, but there's other actors as well. And that's where the DoD saw the need for change, and where we see CMMC come into play. 5 different levels are in CMMC, and they're all geared at securing contractors that handle controlled unclassified information, or CUI, and the level to which a business complies is highly dependent on the kind of information they'll receive from the government to complete their work. So I'm going to pause for a second here, make sure I didn't put everybody to sleep. I know I'm already nerding out and throwing jargon at you. So I want to make sure before I continue that we talk about why you should care. Why should you care about CMMC and what makes it applicable to you and your business? And the way we see it, this is going to be a multi-billion-dollar opportunity in this sector. There's all kinds of tech news agencies reporting on CMMC. You see it on LinkedIn every day. CMMC is a subject of talk in the cybersecurity space. And when we talk about a multi-billion-dollar opportunity, we're not talking about the payout from the DoD. We already know that's multi-billions of dollars, but we're looking at the pay coming from these contractors, looking to mediate and be able to bid on. And there isn't an option going forward in this space in regard to how contractors want to manage their cybersecurity standard now, and the contractors have to follow that standard to be able to bid on and be awarded contractors. And this is black and white. CMMC is leaving little room for gray area, and that's not to talk about or not to say that there's not different ways of doing things to become compliant. For example, there's no guidance yet on a specific tech stack or a product base that you have to use. However, there is guidance that recently became available on the controls and exactly how to meet each one. Going further, I read an article last night from Government Executive, and it talked about this site talks about everything from government spending to new military applications to laws that are coming through. And they're talking about how the DoD contract spending had reached all-time highs in 2020. It was over $600 billion spent. And this particular article mentioned that it's just going to continue to trend upwards. This is all money on primes products, basically. And the idea here is to really just capture a portion of this massive revenue stream and make a successful business out of not only providing customers solutions to their technical woes, but also helping to secure our nation's assets and critical infrastructure. To me, there's a feel-good component to this. This framework's going to allow people to sleep better at night, I think, knowing that nation-state actors aren't getting information from our contractors, and they're not able to build and replicate the same products or weaponry that the DoD is fielding. And to me, we can stand proud knowing that we've done our part in helping to advance the country and other citizens' businesses on a cybersecurity front. So who's impacted by CMMC? It's a huge framework. There's tons of companies, as I've mentioned, and I've mentioned several different entities that this new framework and initiative impacts. But I want to go a little bit more in depth on that, give you guys a better understanding if you're not familiar. So as of June 2020 this year, businesses that are working with the DoD, NASA, the GSA or General Services Administration are all going to have requirements to be compliant with CMMC. And they're going to have to become compliant to continue working for the DoD indirectly through their contracts. And honestly, the immediate change since the new year, and actually since December 2020, there's only been 7 contracts, and these are the Pathfinder contracts that the DoD's releasing. And these contracts typically name the requirements of CMMC as a prerequisite to bid on the work. So primes, contractors, subcontractors operating or associated with the DIB in any way that are handling, processing, storing, or otherwise exposed to controlled unclassified information or federal contract information have to work to become compliant to the level of CMMC that coincides with these contracts that they're intended to work on. And as I said before, the affected companies can range from anything like janitorial service contractors to subcontractors that are creating or manufacturing weapons or aerospace components, as long as it's related to the DoD and those contracts they're handing out. So the framework, as you can see, is really indiscriminate to the type or purpose of the company. What they're seeking to do is uniformly apply cybersecurity standards across the entirety of the defense industrial base. And in case you're wondering, I can save you a trip to Google to see how encompassing the DIB is. I think I mentioned it once. It's over 300,000 companies that work with CUI or FCI in some capacity. Typically, the industry is really affected by this are manufacturing, weapons makers and aerospace. And again, I've already stated these aren't the only industries that you'll see looking to push into CMMC compliance. You'll be really surprised to find that some companies or contractors you wouldn't associate with military application will be in the mix shooting for a certification. Caveat to that is I would also anticipate that companies, looking to get into DoD contracting in the future, or that see a new standard being utilized by DoD associated entities, might also look for help seeking compliance or at least remediation to help bolster their own cyber defense to the levels that CMMC guides. That's saying just, a normal everyday business looking to remediate their cyber defenses to a point they feel safe. They may use this CMMC framework to do just that. So from the client side, we often get a question as a part of who's impacted, who needs to be involved from the client side. And for those of you involved in the sales side of your business, you all know that getting an owner or a C-suite individual involved in IT decisions can be really difficult. And one of the great things about CMMC is it really gets the owner or C-suite's attention. And so the simplest answer we have for how these clients are impacted and who needs to be involved is a quote from a peer that likes to jokingly say, but with a lot of truth in his words, the person that needs to be involved in discussions and decision making on the client side is the person who's going to go to jail under the False Claims Act. Because now with CMMC, self-attestation is huge, and lying about where you stand is just a big no-no in this realm. So this usually lights a fire under the chair of the decision maker, and I'm ready to accept that they are just too risk tolerant, and accept the fact that it's time to become a more risk averse business in alignment with the CMMC requirements. So some of you are probably wondering, when will CMMC go into full effect? Valid concern, but really you can rest assured we have some time, especially the fact that you're here, that you're interested in CMMC, you're orienting yourselves towards the framework, or at least familiarizing yourself with it. I would say you probably can consider yourself at this point ahead of the curve, or really leaders of the pack. There's not a ton of people that are gearing up for this. I would say compared to other frameworks or other initiatives, CMMC is so new that people haven't quite jumped on board yet. But I anticipate we'll see a ton of movement with CMMC this year, both fine tuning from the accrediting body on the framework. We're still seeing updates, I wouldn't say daily or weekly, but there's updates coming out, changes and tweaks. We're going to see businesses ramping up remediation efforts to try and reach the levels that they think they're going to need to comply for their contracts. As I mentioned, we've already got those first 7 contracts out, the Pathfinder contracts, and those are really being used to determine the fortitude of CMMC and really how the primes are able to respond to this new requirement. Can they get all of their subcontractors in alignment? So this is a test run to work the kinks of the new framework, allow for the provisional in 2020 to work through the assessment and submission process. And I'm seeing that there will be, a continuous rollout of CMMC until that 2025 deadline. And that's when CMMC, or the CMMC AB, is saying that all the contracts, or the DoD is saying that all the contracts will have the CMMC requirements in them. And this is when things become make or break for the contractors. Those with existing relationships that they just choose not to comply, they're going to see massive drops in revenue stream. I mean, they're not going to be able to bid on these contracts or get a piece of the pie from the primes anymore. So we'll see another thing with that, and that's new contractors shifting to ingest those contracts where the non-compliant are, prosper. So what's our angle in the market? Really, it's to look at those contractors and help them continue to thrive in the DoD supply chain and not lose out on additional revenue, or have them lose out on additional revenue due to avoidable circumstance. We have clients that have already started this process. We have a number of prospects that are really interested in getting started. So really, today I just want to assure you guys there's no shortage of prospects in this market. It's wide open. We have inquiries daily from new prospects. So it's really wide open for us to capitalize on an opportunity that'll be both fruitful for the provider and for the client that we serve. And some of you might question, 2025 is a deadline. It's 3 to 5 years out before I really have to start worrying about this. So why now? And as I've already stated, we have the 7 contracts out that are Pathfinders. Those are expected to be awarded to the primes that can comply with the CMMC level requirements later this year. But you have to think about the hundreds, if not thousands, of companies that are subcontractors to those primes that are trying to bid and meet the CMMC level requirements. So all these subcontractors underneath also have to meet those levels. For example, we have a current client. There are 130 people that work here, and so it's a small, maybe mid-size company, and they have a level 3 requirements due to their prime accepting the bid or working towards the bid. So what I want you guys to think about is this is 7 contracts. Next year, they expect to release 75 contracts. You're literally looking at thousands of companies, subcontractors that are going to have to comply to their level requirements. So they'll all have to go through a process that begins with gap analysis, leads to remediation, ends with eventual assessment, and then a submission to receive certification. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So if you wait to start your, or if they wait to start their CMMC process in 2025 or a year before, you're going to be well behind the competition, because organizations are already taking action now. They're going to be able to bid on those contracts that are coming through before that 2025 deadline. CMMC AB actually advises to start planning at least 6 months before you're required to have the certification. And there's a couple reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because part of CMMC is maturity and is process maturity. So they have to show evidence that they have a history of good cyber hygiene activities. I keep mentioning CMMC AB, and I want to quickly review for those of you that don't know who they are. So the CMMC AB, or the CMMC accreditation body, is the governing body for CMMC and is made up of industry leaders and professionals. And the board members there, they hold different positions professionally, but most of them are coming from a history of cybersecurity professions and leadership roles within the tech community. So these guys are overseeing qualified and trained assessors and consultants, and they're looking for these people to deliver consistent and informative assessments based on the guidance that the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Framework, that's a mouthful, CMMC, is giving. Oh, excuse me, I missed my slide. The CMMC model itself is created and managed by the DoD. And there are a number of terms that I've been throwing at you guys, and I think it's probably important that we review those so that you're familiar with what they are. So we'll go through these real quick. The key players here, in what CMMC describes as the ecosystem usually starts out with registered practitioners, which is what I am. And these are the individuals that have completed specific CMMC training, and they've been recognized by the accrediting body through an awarded designation stating that we have completed formal training, we understand the CMMC framework at a high level, and we're qualified to do consultation. Registered practitioners can assist RPOs, or registered provider organizations, in performing gap analysis and consultation to evaluate current cyber health of the target companies. And during the provisional period, we can actually participate on informal assessment teams. So we can go in with a provisional assessor right now and help on an assessment. But when formal assessments begin, when the rollout is a little bit more advanced, we will be just limited to consultation. So RPs are the first level of the CMMC ecosystem. You can kind of consider them like the bottom of the food chain when it comes to designations. So we have, like I said, a high level understanding of what CMMC is. But the more granular, in-depth understanding would be the assessors and even the provisional assessors that were named last year. So I just mentioned registered provider organizations, and what RPOs are companies that provide advice, consultation, remediation services to the clients without performing an actual assessment. A RPO is valuable to provide like a gap assessment or a remediation effort to contractors who have been determined to need assistance in getting their cybersecurity program to meet all the CMMC requirements they're subject to. A RPO will also provide guidance and trusted knowledge through that process so that the client is informed throughout the entire process. A big part of CMMC is the training and continuous improvement of your cybersecurity environment. So the more you know, the better you'll be at training your employees and maturing your practice. And that's a huge part. I keep mentioning maturity and maturing the practice, but it's a huge component of this framework, always continuing to improve on that cybersecurity posture. And that's really where process and practice maturity come into play with CMMC. It's an evolving framework. It's focused on maturing your cyber defense and what they call cyber hygiene to levels that limit the risk for the DoD. And our observation is that most organizations won't have somebody on staff like me or high-level engineers that need to engineer some of these solutions. And this is where engaging an RPO can make their life a lot easier. I want to talk about C3PAOs. It sounds like C3PO from Star Wars, but what C3PAOs are, we consider them like, or maybe the client rather would consider them like the bad guys. They come in, they are the ones that do the assessment. They are the ones that tell you everything that's wrong with you. So they'll go, whereas RPOs get, all the glory for helping a company through gap analysis and their remediation efforts on their plan of action and milestones or their POAM, and leading these companies to a place for eventual certification, a C3PO is there to ensure that all the controls are met. And when they aren't, they're going to delay that certification until the controls are met as required. Right now, meeting CMMC controls, like I said, there's no gray area. So it's not like you can be 75% or 90% or whatever percent compliant. You have to be 100% compliant. There's no choice there. So they can delay this until those controls are met. So the long-winded definition of C3PAO is a certified third-party assessor organization, which, like I said, is just a company that's been certified by the accrediting body to provide CMMC assessments using contracted or in-house certified assessors. And C3PAO has one other requirement, and that's that they'll be certified to the CMMC level that your client requires. So you can feel confident in the assessment because they're coming from a place that they know. And assessors that work through a C3PAO are also trained and certified to the level which they're able to certify. So you'll never have a guy come in that's assessing, a level 3 business that is a level 3 or a level 1 assessor. They keep it so they have to comply with the same level to which they assess. How long does it take to become CMMC compliant? We don't know yet. And part of that is really subjective to the client. It's highly dependent on the existing cybersecurity program that a client has in place and how closely they're following the plan. The M in CMMC, again, implies a core principle of the framework, maturity. And being able to provide evidence of process and practice maturity will allow for a quicker turnaround from gap analysis to assessment. A component of the assessments that your client will undergo include providing evidence such as logs, configurations, historical information, all regarding technical controls that will show that processes to detect, deter, and prevent have all been in place, and they've all been monitored for a reasonable amount of time. And when I say that, a side note is that there's not a specifically disclosed amount of time that an entity has to show maturity. So it's going to be somewhat assessor right now. However, all these assessment results are reviewed by C3PAO and they're sent to the AB for certification. So guidance on maturity timelines will likely be provided at a later date. I want to touch on the complexity of CMMC from kind of a high level. And that's because, the one thing that has me a bit unsettled when I hear it is CMMC is no big deal. This is going to be an easy process. There's a number of cybersecurity peers that have lived and breathed in the government sector, specifically in the DoD headspace, that have familiarity with the previous standards and frameworks like NIST 800-171, for example. The issue is that these individuals know the previous frameworks. The requirements to actually adhere and go through such a formal process really lacked presence previously, though. The other issue with this mentality, and I'm saying this or bringing this up because I see it on LinkedIn, I see it on some news articles. The problem with the mentality is that publicly saying that these on platforms like social media, that CMMC is something easy to do might actually lead contractors to believe that it's so irrationally easy that they can do it themselves. And that's not to say that there aren't contractors or companies that could do this themselves. They'll likely just be a rare exception. And the exception to that, I guess, is the primes will probably have internal teams capable of reaching adherence and certification and doing governance over this framework. But to explain, I guess, at a high level, the complexity of CMMC, CMMC consists of 5 levels of process maturity. And they're divided as performed, documented, managed, reviewed, and optimized. The entire framework consists of 171 different controls that span across 17 different domains. And these domains cover everything from risk management to system design lifecycle, security operations, and incident response. And most of the controls in the framework will fall into one of these categories. And at NuWave, we've been affectionately calling these our cybersecurity buckets. On top of that, recently CMMC AB released the level 1 and level 3 assessment guides. And these guys have shown the true complexity behind CMMC level 3. So when I say that, where there once were 130 controls to gain certification at level 3, we're now exposed to more of a granular level of those controls. And they could have up to 15 additional pieces of guidance to take action on. That guidance is anything from writing policy to implementing a configuration to meet a control requirement, or some new process that you might have to start with these clients. And that 130 controls, those turn into over 300 action items to be completed. So as you can see, CMMC is no small task, and the remediation is huge, especially for clients unfamiliar with this kind of framework or had never been pushed to move this way before. So the change is going to take time, commitment, and really a lot of expertise. Just talking about kind of like the steps towards compliance, and before I hand this back to Chad to close it out. So the first and most obvious step an organization should take in becoming CMMC compliant is to engage an RPO that's listed in the CMMC marketplace. And I'm bringing that up specifically because there are a lot of entities out there that are claiming to be able to reduce time to compliance with CMMC, and some that have even claimed that they can get organizations certified. So utilizing the marketplace to validate these credentials is just highly recommended. I think it's a have to do, not you should do. The second step is, as I've mentioned before, we go through a gap analysis. So the RPs working through an RPO will analyze current tech stack and cyber defenses to determine the fit with the requirements of the level the client wishes to comply to with CMMC. So the RPO will provide a deliverable in the form of a gap analysis, detailing all the shortcomings of the organization's cyber defenses and other facets of process improvement that should be addressed prior to assessment. Then after gap analysis is completed, the partner organization serving as a technical team, or perhaps it's an internal technical team, will go through the remediation, touching on all areas identified as needing improvement or change. And then we're looking at the next step, which is preparing for certification. So this is an important period because this is where we go and do evidence gathering before they're actually speaking with assessors and going through a formal evaluation. They'll need to gather their evidence, and make sure that they're showing both process and practice maturity. So all the things we've implemented, we want to show a history of this is how we've done things. This is our cyber hygiene. This is how we're responding to incidents. All of that is going to help them through an assessment and gain certification. After those 4 steps are complete, the client is ready for a formal assessment. And the takeaway from this process is that the certification is only 3 years. It's just like a CompTIA certification. So you have 3 years that you're certified, and the client must continue during those 3 years to improve and enhance processes and practices to show maturity for their next assessment. And this is a place where we see perpetual work in this space spawning from, because it's giving our organizations an ongoing revenue stream. So with all of that said, I'm going to turn this back over to Chad, talk about the cost side of things and how your companies and NuWave can partner to make our mark on this sector. I really appreciate everybody's attention over what was probably the longest 30 minutes of your life in 2021 so far. So thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, Eric. If you want to jump to the next slide, we sure do know how to put people to sleep, don't we? Well, actually, hopefully we didn't. In all seriousness, though, hopefully we've shown that CMMC is a huge opportunity for all of us. We are also recognizing that many IT service providers and/or their clients do not have the desire or resources to do the CMMC gap analysis that Eric talked about, or perhaps even the ongoing governance of the CMMC program. That's really where we see a lot of help is going to be needed once the remediation and the CMMC certifications happen, just the ongoing governance of the program. So this is where NuWave can help. I'd say if you didn't listen to anything else on this slide deck this morning, NuWave is here to help you make money with CMMC. So NuWave has built a team of CMMC subject matter experts, including the first registered practitioner in Michigan. We have a provisional assessor on the team, and as Eric said, for right now, that means that we've got somebody that knows kind of both sides of the equation. With our CMMC gap analysis services, as well as our CMMC compliance as a service offering, which again provides that ongoing governance, including the SSP and the POAM that Eric talked about, NuWave can come in alongside you, and I really stress that, come in alongside you and help you and your clients who have the CMMC compliance requirements. Eric, you can switch sides. Thank you. As Eric mentioned, CMMC impacts companies who manufacture goods like forks and spoons and forks and spoons, I should say, for mess halls, and it's not limited to companies that make weaponry for the military. That's one of the big misnomers we hear out there. So if you have clients that do work with DoD, chances are high that CMMC will be in their future. And if you're interested in having one of our CMMC specialists jump on a call with you or your client, we can help, and we'd be happy to help you identify opportunities that might exist. We've got our contact information there. If you want to send us an email, we could discuss a formal partner agreement. And last, I'll close with saying that I'd like to address the question that I get often, especially from peers, especially those that are literally in the same city as us. We're competing for managed service business, and now we're having live conversations about working together on some of their clients. And that question really comes down to a question that would be on my mind if I were sitting on this conversation, is that, if you bring in NuWave, do you risk us trying to cut you out of the equation? And I'll give you an emphatic no. And in fact, I'll ensure you that if you bring NuWave into your client, we would formalize a contract between your firm and NuWave. And long story short, we'll stay in our lane. Our lane being most likely the gap analysis and or the compliance as a service.